Hi, welcome to this part of my guide and review of the Solo Adventuring Toolkit. If you haven't seen the other parts of this guide and review, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to talk about gamer types and impact on solo play. There's a lot of theory here. I'm just going to read some of the points to you and I'm going to give my opinion on them. So, there are many types of people who play tabletop role-playing games, both as players as well as game masters. While there is certainly no restriction on who can play solo and who cannot, it may be useful to reflect on what sorts of elements of the game call out to you, and understand how that might have an impact on playing solo. Yes, this is quite logical, because if you enjoy a certain aspect of role-playing games, you want to enhance or feature those aspects in your solo sessions. So if you enjoy combat, you want to have a lot of combat in your sessions. If you enjoy social situations or navigating a dangerous or treacherous environment with a lot of hazards and such, then you can focus on those situations because you are the only one playing that role-playing game as a solo experience, of course. You don't need to think too much about what the other members of the group want, because like I said, it's a one man or one woman experience. So here is why it matters. Who you are as a player of traditional tabletop role-playing games will have an impact on how you approach solo play. In fact, knowing who you are as a gamer will help you a great deal, because whatever your tendencies might be in a traditional group and social setting, those leanings are likely to be much stronger in a solo environment. So that's pretty much what I just said about that solo experience focused on a particular aspect that you enjoy. Then we have an introduction to the types of gamers. This is by no means meant to be a fully comprehensive list of every kind of person who might gravitate towards a tabletop RPG. The list is quite reductive by design. So here you have several stereotypes. They are not to be considered as good or bad. They are just like frameworks to see if you fit in one of those frameworks or in several of them, so that you can better tailor your solo RPG sessions. First, we have the rules lawyers. You know the type, or maybe you are one. Some players read through published rulebooks and commit their vagaries to memory, as if they were preparing for a standardized test. In practice, however, rules lawyers can have an unfortunate tendency to wield their intricate knowledge like a weapon, battering other players and the game master over the head with factoids. So rules lawyers are not inherently bad players, but knowing that you yourself have a tendency towards being a rules lawyer can help you in solo play. So a rules lawyer, like many of you know, is basically someone who has great mastery of the rules, or sometimes a pseudo mastery. There are those players that think that they know the rules and they swear by them, but it turns out that they are incorrect. So it is a negative stereotype, in my opinion, when the rules lawyer is quite arrogant. Perhaps he or she falls into hubris. So he could be quite wrong and at the same time quite arrogant, and that's when trouble could happen. But if the rules lawyer is basically just someone who has great knowledge of the rules and is just there to help, to have fun, that is perhaps support the players or the game master with his knowledge of the mechanics of a particular system, then that's a great player in my opinion. So then you have the goals of the rules lawyer. A rules lawyer can have a number of other goals, but one of their goals is certainly to make sure play is fair, specifically that everyone is playing by the same rules. Yes, I agree with this, but I also think that rules lawyers, they enjoy a lot not only displaying their mastery of the rules, but also just making everything click. So they can be helpful, but at the same time, I think a rules lawyer enjoys making sure that, oh, this is carried out correctly because I learned it correctly, or I am applying it correctly. So you could say that they are fans or enthusiasts of efficacy and efficiency. Then we have details on the benefits. If you tend towards rules law naturally, then you are in luck. you'll probably have a good chance of remembering rules without having to look them up. And because you're the only player involved, the possibility of frustrating other players is zero. You also have details on risks and concerns. The whole point of gaming, solo or traditional, is to have fun. Some rules lawyers are so focused on the rules and adhering to them that they find it challenging to simply have fun through their own initiative. And this toolkit may quite frankly annoy some rules lawyers because they might approach this book having learned a great deal about a particular system only to start reading through hundreds of ways to break that game. So when it comes to risks and concerns, I think this also applies to solo gaming in general. The main objective is to have fun, but at the same time, you also want things to be challenging. Otherwise, there is no point in playing if you're not going to be applying a solution to a particular problem. If all of the problems are solved from the start because you are hand waving or ignoring all of the rules, then it is quite pointless. But the rules lawyer, he sometimes gets a bit into the other side of things, that he focuses so much on the rules that he forgets that in role-playing games, because it is a simulation of reality in a fictional environment, sometimes you can come up with rulings, you can bend the rules if it makes more sense with the encounters, with the scene, but there needs to be that balance with challenges, with difficulties. But like I said, if you focus too much on applying the rules just as they are, or if you are more focused on finding a specific rule instead of just having fun, then there could be some difficulties. So balance is key. Then you have some tips on how to approach solo play as a lawyer. As a rules lawyer, you need to be confident and indulge in your prodigious ability to memorize, remember, and apply the rules. So that's the advantage. You don't need to keep looking for those rules in this core rulebook or in this splat book. You already know the system, or you have a general idea so that you can look up or find the information quite quickly. So that's an advantage. In solo play, you're only going to be focused on the results of the oracles, the tables provided by the solo toolkit or any other toolkit or emulator or oracle that you also wish to use. So that's a huge advantage in my opinion. Next, we have the role player. A role player gets immersed in his or her character. They commit themselves to the experience of pretending to be someone else. Role players may seem like the ideal players. After all, aren't these role-playing games? And indeed, they can be great fun. They are focused more on improvisational acting and perhaps storytelling. However, role players, like any player type who indulges in extremes, can be a bit annoying if they don't break out of character, or if they forget many of the rules, or they don't learn anything about the rules, because then they are not playing a game. They are doing something else. They are just acting, or they are just telling a story, but they are not playing a game anymore. This is my personal opinion. When it comes to role players, they are a must in a role-playing game. Otherwise, you're going to be playing things as if you're playing a board game or a video game. But many role players use their interpretations as an excuse to be quite lazy when it comes to learning the rules of a game or a system, and you're no longer playing a game. You're waiting for the other players at the table to do everything for you. So when it comes to solo play, if you do not apply the rules, well, you're just going to be carrying out some sort of inner monologue with no chance of success or failure. Here you have an explanation of the goals. Role players want to live the experience of being someone else even for a short time. They are in it for the social interaction and often for the jokes and metagaming aspects of the social experience. Now you could be thinking, how is this possible in a solo experience? In fact, throughout the years I have heard some players saying that solo role-playing is impossible, but I think those players have a very weak imagination. I imagine that my intelligent viewers sometimes have this inner monologue. Every time you encounter any situation in real life, sometimes you have this inner conversation with yourself. In fact, it's great for solving problems. You carry out these simulations, you create these personas inside of your mind Although you have to be careful because sometimes you could turn a bit, uh, go into some neurotic scenarios. You imagine things that are not there. Like, for example, maybe you're at work, your boss calls you for something. If you are a positive person, or a, what would you say, like, yes, a well-adjusted individual to the way that you are living your life, you could be thinking, oh, my boss is calling me for a meeting. Maybe it's something good, maybe it's something bad, who knows? And you start to think about some things that have happened in the past, and you say, oh, well, this good thing happened, maybe I'm getting a raise. Maybe he's going to try to make some corrections or give me a warning about something. So you are creating different scenarios of what could happen. But someone who is completely unhinged could be creating all of those catastrophic situations that haven't even happened. So you're basically scaring yourself, and perhaps it's not even related to that. It would be as ridiculous as, for example, a martial artist in a physical confrontation feeling the pain of blows that haven't even landed upon his body. So, in the case of a solo role player, you can create those personas. You're going to be playing as the player characters, as the villains. You're going to have a sort of split personality moment in that fantasy. Then we have information on the benefits. Role players are usually quite good at developing story elements of their own in their head and suggesting them to the group. This dynamic creative spark and ability to imbue one's own persona into a story is particularly useful during solo play, which can tend to get focused a great deal on the mechanics of the game and can sometimes provide only a thin route of storytelling to get from X to Y. So, like I said, it's all about creating that fictional environment, but also actually playing as the characters in that setting. For game masters, this is going to be quite easy. You are already playing as many different personalities within a campaign. But when it comes to solo roleplay, you are also role-playing as the player characters, as the main characters. Then we have information on risks and concerns. Role players are not all extroverts, but they tend to thrive on the social interaction component of a traditional RPG. Not being able to do this might greatly hamper a role player's enjoyment of the game. More so than any other type of player, role players may be least well suited to even engaging in solo play to begin with. Everyone approaches traditional role-playing games hoping to get different things out of it. Solo play, even as greatly developed as it is in this toolkit, cannot fully reproduce what some role players most seek out of the experience. Finally, of all player types, role players tend to be the most forgetful about the rules, or the most neglectful of reading through them in the first place. So yes, this is true. I really have to talk about this. I think that people who are into reflecting, meditation, exploring the inner world, so to speak, are going to have a very easy time being role players in a solo environment. Maybe someone is going to watch this video in the many years in the future, but at the current time, recently, perhaps even in some places, there are some social difficulties because of a certain virus, let's call it like that. And a lot of people entered into this crisis because they were so used to losing themselves in the mob, in the personalities of many other people that didn't explore themselves. They were so out of touch with themselves that they entered into a sort of crisis mode. And solo roleplay allows you to explore that inner side of yourself when you are playing as either the player characters or the villains. And yes, there are many players that sometimes focus too much on, like I said, improvisational acting or storytelling, and they simply do not know how to play a game. So sometimes the other players of the group and the game master, they are basically carrying them around, and I think this is annoying and potentially frustrating for the group, that they have all learned how to make attacks, the skill checks, their spells, etc. And you have this player that is waiting all the time for someone else to tell them what to roll, how the spell works, how this feat can be used. And yes, I think that is quite rude. In fact, I do not have such players in my group. Then we have tips on how to approach solo play. You need to be prepared, if not for disappointment, then to enjoy different components of the traditional RPG experience. Simply put, either you need to start doing the work yourself, or you need to be prepared to fudge a great deal of the roles all the time. And I think, personally, I think that would be, like I said, not even playing a game. You're going to be cheating yourself. There are not going to be any challenges or risks involved. So if you are a role player, in the more positive side of the stereotype, I think you are going to have a great advantage when it comes to playing as those personas. But if you are of the negative stereotype, then you're going to feel perhaps that it's such a pain to learn the rules that you never learned in the first place, that you never bothered to go through or to read through. Then we have the min-maxers. Min-maxers are similar to rules lawyers, and indeed some players can even be both at the same time. Min-maxers often memorize a great deal of esoteric rules from various sources, but their goal is not simply to amass encyclopedic knowledge or even to ensure everyone else is playing by the rules fairly. Min-maxers learn the rules in detail so that they can better exploit them. Their goal in playing RPGs tends to be mechanical success, succeeding in attack rolls, inflicting the most damage, duping the most non-player characters, gaining the best equipment, etc. Yes, when it comes to min-maxers, they enjoy a lot. They find great fun and pleasure, you could say, in finding those mechanical combinations, intricacies to create a superpowered character, perhaps use the right combination of spells, the right equipment, the feats, the skills that simply allow you to go through any situation with great ease. And the great enjoyment for them is that it's not the feat itself, that is not the accomplishment, but rather the way that they discover those exploits. So when it comes to goals, min-maxers want to craft powerful characters and succeed in the game they are playing. Their definition of success is often the amassing of experience points and levels, character abilities, equipment, weapons, wealth, everything that I mentioned a few moments ago. When it comes to the benefits, you've got a substantial advantage in pursuing solo play. You already have a mindset well suited towards figuring out the optimal way to take advantage of a set of rules, mechanics. While this is useful in any gameplay, it's particularly valuable in solo play, where you have much less control and options in terms of the number of players and player characters under your control. So it says here that in one player, one character play, this benefits greatly because of the min-max mindset. But I think it also works greatly when you are playing with several player characters. If you decide to play a solo RPG with a group of player characters, you're also going to have a lot of fun as a min-maxer coming up with the right party configuration or combination. Like, oh, I want this barbarian because the barbarian deals a bit more damage when enraged, but because he has low defense, I also want to have this caster that could use some spells to raise his armor class. I also want to have a thief so that he can get behind and attack the enemies when the barbarian is distracting them. It's all about that. And then you have details on risks and concerns. That said, min-maxers can get frustrated easily if their efforts in carefully arranging and choosing and designing the optimal character build still aren't sufficient to succeed. Regardless of how well you build your character, some of it all still comes down to luck. I actually haven't met a min-maxer that becomes frustrated, in fact. Yes, I am trying to remember, but throughout the years, I cannot think of a single min-maxer that gets so frustrated. I think that even when they get defeated or somehow, yes, like their plans are foiled, they take it as a challenge, like, oh, I'm going to create a new character, a new party configuration. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't any min-maxers that do not get frustrated, but I think they are somewhat uncommon in my experience. And then they give you some tips on how to approach solo play as a min-maxer. Fortunately, this toolkit contains a wealth of options for changing one's luck during play, such as modifiers, dice chaining, and balance points, just to name a few. We will talk about this in a future part of this review. It allows you to create stronger player characters. If you're using just a single player character, you have some mechanisms in this toolkit so that character is more capable or more powerful. Now let's talk about team role. Another way of looking at player types is to consider the role the character plays in the context of the adventuring party. Those familiar with or coming to tabletop RPGs from a background of MMORPGs or video games may be most comfortable with this descriptive approach. So here you have some, not all of them, but some types or stereotypes of the sort of party roles in a video game, such as DPS that deals damage per second, although the author uses some examples that I wouldn't use. In the case of DPS, he places fighters and barbarians, but there are more successful or more powerful DPS characters such as the wizard, the sorcerer. So fighters and barbarians rather fit the tank type, and I actually do not find the tank role, which I find somewhat strange because tanks are a must-have in my opinion in most situations. So here the example of fighters and barbarians, they are more like tanks. You also have healer. Everyone is familiar with this type or role. The cleric, the druid, anyone who can protect or heal or cure. You also have the social toolbox, which could be a rogue or a bard or any character with high charisma and such skills, socially oriented skills that is. You also have the leader, typically a fighter or a paladin, because the fighter is up front. He's not going to be very skilled in social situations, but it makes perfect sense for the paladin or the cleric or the bard. And so it's all about considering these roles for party configurations if you are playing with several player characters, but also if you are playing with just one player character, it gives a better understanding of the focus of a solo session or even an entire campaign. So let's say that you are playing as a fighter. You are going to be pretty bad or just decent at many other things when it comes to climbing and jumping and sneaking around and dealing with traps. You're going to be potentially abysmal in some of those things, or quite decent when it comes to jumping and climbing because of your athleticism. But as a fighter, you want to stick to combat. So you're going to try to drive all of the situations in the solo session towards combat, or hire the non-player characters that have skills, abilities, spells, artifacts, items that cover your weaknesses, that things that fulfill certain actions or tasks that you simply are not able to cover within your skill set because you are focused on fighting. And this applies to the other classes as well. If you play as a wizard, you want to have a few henchmen to protect you, perhaps to serve as tanks. Or if you are going completely solo, you want to choose your spells carefully. Some spells that raise your defense or armor class, it depends on the system that you are running. Or you need to position yourself in strategically viable places where you can cast those damage dealing spells, those heavy spells that can completely obliterate the enemy in a round or two, so that they do not reach you, they do not get into melee combat with you, or perhaps ranged combat as well. You need to have those spells that shield you or protect you from arrows, crossbow bolts, etc. Then we have details of playing a solo RPG as a former or current game master. Ultimately, the best solo players will be or have been game masters themselves. This is not to say that players who have never been game masters lack imaginations or any other skill that makes solo play better. Anyone who has ever been a game master, who has faced a group of people who have their own ideas and inklings and has helped guide a shared storytelling experience, that sort of person has already been through the flexibility, imagination, and swift pivoting that comes in quite handy when playing solo. I do think that game masters are going to have that advantage when running a solo RPG, because you just need to get used to the idea of playing as a player character and running the villains and the non-player characters as determined by some parameters of the oracle that you are using, or the toolkit in this case. And of course, you also have to deal with generating some random environments. But in the case of game masters that improvise their sessions or that create everything beforehand using some generators, that's going to be pretty common, or you're going to find it quite familiar. Or in the case of a game master running a game for an emulated player character or player characters, like I do with Abraham's method, the link will be in the description below. It's just about getting used to that particular concept. But I also think that solo gaming is perfect to get someone started into the fine art of game mastering. Because you have this fictional environment where you can make mistakes, you can take your time, you can do all sorts of things, and you don't feel any pressure of running an enjoyable experience for the group. You could consider it like training grounds. So then you can take your experiences learned in solo gaming to a traditional RPG experience. This concludes this part of the guide and review for today. As you can see, this section is just about reaffirming the sort of gamer that you could be and the sort of player characters that you could have in the party, or that you can choose as your character archetype or class if you're just using one player character. So you can either tailor the solo session for that particular party configuration or for that particular player character, or you can also consider ways to approach problem solving based on the strengths and weaknesses of that particular party or player character. Once again, thank you for watching this part of the review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending Drive-Thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.